Well, good morning to everybody. We're starting our seminar organized traditionally by the Friends of European Russia, Forum of the Friends of European Russia. It's a traditional seminar which we are having quite often. And this time we are devoting our seminar on a very special topic, which is called Hooked on Russian Gas, How to Build European Resilience, Europe's Resilience. That is really quite a hot topic. I just will try to remind you that we started to speak that topic perhaps last year in June or July, when we had a seminar which we called on geopolitical consequences of Green Deal. Then we had last late autumn, we spoke about what is happening in European markets with Gazprom activities. Then, being member of European Parliament at the same time, I wrote and collected signatures of the members to ask Commission to start investigation of Gazprom practices. As you know, the Commission announced that they are taking some initiative. But of course, it's a broader question, what is happening and how things are developing, especially with all geopolitical developments which we are witnessing around with the threats to Ukraine and so on. So today, really, we have a very important discussion on this topic, which really is a hot topic, I would say, both in practice and in discussions, at least here in European Parliament. And I'm very happy that today we have really prominent speakers, starting with Vladimir Milov, who everybody knows him. I will not introduce too much, former Deputy Minister of Energy of Russia, so he knows very well, that field. Also, he's associate of Alexei Navalny, and really we have a lot of common activities in our informal forum. Then we shall have two prominent experts from International Energy Agency, which quite recently published very important reports on the situation in the European market, on what Gazprom really is doing and what are the challenges, for especially on the European continent. And then we shall have also Frank Umbach from University of Bonn, good expert and important and very well-known expert on this field. And we have Peter Liese, who will join a little bit later, my colleague from European Parliament, EPP coordinator in ENVI committee, rapporteur on Fit for 55 package from Green Deal. And then the last one will be Alexander Sherba, chief advisor of Naftogaz, CEO of Naftogaz of Ukraine. So we shall cover several topics which are really important and which are connected with today's issue which we are discussing. Of course, first of all, we need to see very clearly, and I hope that both experts from International Energy Agency and Vladimir Milov will show us what Gazprom is doing in European markets with cuts in deliveries and what is the consequences, how the prices are rising up. Recently, I published a small paper on, at least in my opinion, Gazprom is now, Kremlin decided not only to use Gazprom for geopolitical purposes, weaponizing gas deliveries, but also I see a lot of clear evidence that Gazprom started the war against implementation of Green Deal, and to with efforts to create some kind of confusion among citizens of Europe. Is that Green Deal guilty for the rise of prices? My opinion is totally opposite. It's not Green Deal, but exactly the war against implementation of Green Deal, who is responsible for this, surge in the prices. And second, of course, topic is is what should be our long-term strategy. Again, my opinion is implementation of the Green Deal is exactly what could help us to become less dependent on Gazprom, which has quite a dominating position in Europe, with more than 40% of gas delivering to Europe, and that creates all our problems. And then, of course, the last point is exactly that today, when we are really very much worried about pressure from Kremlin on Ukraine, we see also that security of gas supplies to Ukraine is very much important issue, especially looking into next few years. And that is what EU should take as its own responsibility to help to assist both Ukraine, Moldova, and the whole region with the security of gas supply. So that's my introduction on what are the topics. And I stop here, and then my pleasure really to give the floor to Vladimir Milov. As I said, the first, we shall have introductory remarks by all our speakers. Then we shall have time also for Q&A, and all questions should be written into the chat. So Vladimir, please go on.
Thank you very much. It's a very important discussion, and I wanted to thank Mr. Kubilius and members of the European Parliament and friends of European Russia for following through on this topic of Gazprom's deliberate market manipulation last fall, which have contributed greatly to an unprecedented gas price crisis in Europe. It's very important that this topic actually investigated beyond plain Gazprom denials, and that conclusions are taken, including the necessary regulatory measures to make sure that these things never repeat themselves again. Because I'm speaking as a Russian here, what is happening is also extremely damaging to the reputation of my country, because obviously people get clearer and clearer understanding that Gazprom was deliberately manipulating the market, and it can only lead to political desire and plans, specific actions to actually get rid of Russian gas supplies, energy supplies. So the long-term consequences of such manipulative actions for my country will be very negative. So I'm also very interested, as well as citizens of the European Union, that this is investigated and all these negative deliberate actions are brought to light. So I would like to concentrate specifically on this topic of gas market manipulation by Gazprom, because we have discussed this already several times, but I've recently written a detailed paper for the Wilfred Martens Center for European Studies, which is to come out very soon in March, with a lot of facts, figures, and detailed analysis actually proving that deliberate market manipulation was in fact taking place. You probably have seen a shorter version of that as my blog post at the Martens Center website, but I will just outline 5 points why I believe that Gazprom was deliberately manipulating the European market. First, the supply statistics is clearly showing us, despite the fact that the Gazprom is hiding a lot of information and did not yet provide a detailed breakdown of a country-by-country exports in 2021. But from the general figures, it can be clearly seen that the exports of gas to European Union in 2021 had declined by more than 10 billion cubic meters as compared to 2020. It's important to understand that we are talking about the COVID-struck 2020, the year before, which was a very low benchmark for comparison already. But in 2021, Gazprom reduced supplies even compared to that. There's also another feed of statistics which can be found on Gazprom's website that is called Remit, which is a breakdown of daily supplies of gas to the European Union through all major networks, Ukrainian transit network, Belarus and Poland, the Yamal-Europe pipeline, and other directions. So actually, these tables are placed at Gazprom's website not in too much of a user-friendly format, but I actually did this exercise of, copy-pasting all these figures into Excel tables and calculating, comparing the actual supplies of gas to the European Union in the second half of 2021 to the previous year. So the result was striking. Gazprom in September through December last year, just within 4 months, when the price crisis of the European market was the most severe, Gazprom had supplied over 13 billion cubic meters of gas less to the EU as compared to 2020. So there was a particularly significant reduction of supplies in the second half of the year when price crisis of the European market was the harshest. And actually, the second point, which is pretty evident, and you don't even have to look, it's all over the place. You can just read Gazprom's news feed or speeches of its major top managers. When the crisis broke out, they said that, listen, but we don't have additional volumes to supply to the European market. We'll be most happy to, but we don't have them. At the same time, they continuously say that they have excess upstream production capacity in the amount of about 150 billion cubic meters. And I quote a speech from Mr. Miller, who is specifically boasting that this is our competitive advantage to maintain such a huge capacity surplus. Point number 3, there's a very different data. We all heard that the price crisis was caused by insufficient accumulation of gas stock in European underground storages. But at the same time, Gazprom pursued a very different policy vis-a-vis Russian storage facilities. It had injected over 73 BCM of gas, which is an absolute historic record-breaking volume, into Russian storages for the winter season of 21-22. That is over 13 BCM higher than the previous year, 2020-21, previous winter, which was indeed reported back then, over a year ago, as also a historic record. That was 60 BCM injection in Russian storages back then, and it was over 73 BCM this season. Now, nothing has happened on the temperature front so exceptional that Gazprom would need another, to increase its Russian storage stocks by over 22%, by additional 13 BCM. We didn't have no little ice age, no nothing, just a more or less regular winter. At the end of December, Miller had reported at a meeting with Putin that the drawdown of gas from Russian storages by end December, at around New Year time, was only 17%. So 83% of gas injected in Russian storages remained intact, which means that all these explanations that we are expecting extreme temperatures for this winter in Russia, this didn't match reality. So clearly this gas that Gazprom was withholding from the European market, it had injected into Russian storages. So there's a big yes. Yes, they had additional volumes to be supplied to Europe, but they deliberately chosen not to do so. The fourth point is that Gazprom also owns a significant part of underground storage capacity in Europe, about 10% of the European storage capacities. And there were a lot of reports, the Financial Times have written a specific article about that actually it was Gazprom specifically which was undersupplying its storage facilities ahead of the winter season in Europe. Other storages, which were not owned by Gazprom, were filled at a more or less normal average, multi-year average level. So only Gazprom-owned storages in Europe were largely empty. And the fifth point, it's extremely important to investigate the long-term contractual relationships between Gazprom and its major European counterparts, because Gazprom says that it satisfied all the minimum contract obligations for gas supply and actually never received any additional requests for more volume under long-term contracts. When the media sources, and I specifically quoted the Reuters article on that, when the media sources asked the European gas companies a question, did they actually request more supplies from Gazprom? Most of them refused to answer. which is a very important point, and it points out that the non-transparency of these relations, obviously European companies are afraid to speak about the sensitive contractual relations with Gazprom in public. But it means that if they had requested for additional volumes but were refused, and if they are not speaking about this in public, it means some sort of complicity in this market manipulation. So this relation should be investigated. At the same time, we all know that Gazprom categorically refused to send extra volumes to the European spot market, volumes which they had. They had excess upstream capacity. They had overly excess of gas in Russian storage facilities, which they pumped ahead of this winter season. Now, to conclude, I have to say that this figure, 13 BCM, which was recurring during my speech, in September through December, during four last months of 2021, Gazprom supplied 13 BCM less gas to the European Union as compared to 2020. At the same time, Gazprom had injected the same 13 BCM more into the Russian storages. What does this figure mean? It was reported then in December, European gas storage facilities were filled about 20 BCM less than the average for this time of winter. So 13 BCM is about 2/3 of that. There was gas. Gazprom could easily, if this 13 BCM were supplied simply at the level of 2020, then Gazprom would have easily reduced European gas deficit significantly, more or less would have solved the problem of deficit of gas in the European gas storages, but it had deliberately chosen not to do so. This is outright market manipulation, and that is not a normal commercial behavior on the background of the fact that spot prices in Europe hit at sometimes $2,000, and even otherwise than that were exceptionally high during most of 2021. So it's not a normal commercial behavior to withhold the gas from the very premium, expensive spot market without any ability to supply the gas anywhere else, because Gazprom's Western Siberian facilities are not interconnected with China. Gazprom does not produce LNG in Western Siberia and European part of Russia. So they simply withheld the volume without supplying it elsewhere, specifically to manipulate the European market. I hope my publication, which will come out in more detail in March with the help of Wilfred Martin Center, will actually help to launch a real investigation into market manipulation by Gazprom. Because if European Commission does not do that, this crisis has a great chance of being repeated time and again.
Well, thanks, Vladimir. Really, as we hear, very good message, as we hear from Commission, at least they announced that they are starting some kind of investigation by Commissioner Vestager. So we hope that it will be done. Now, really, I would suggest that my colleague Peter Liese, he joined us, but maybe I will ask, first of all, as we talked before, that our experts from International Energy Agency would make their presentation, joint presentation, because I see that it will be good to continue, first of all, on facts, what do we see now in the market, and then we shall go next will be then Peter Liese. So as I understand, first of all, Mr. Molnar will start with presentation, and then Mr. Karpinski will join. Yes, please go on.
Thank you, Mr. Kubilius. My name is Gergely Molnar. I'm a gas analyst at the International Energy Agency. And first of all, we would like to thank you for the invite. I have the pleasure to be joined today with my colleague, Milov Karpinski. In the first part of the presentation, we will provide an overview of recent gas market dynamics here in Europe. And in the second part of the presentation, Mr. Karpinski will have a closer look on Gazprom's behavior in Europe and its impact on the market. please allow me to share our presentation. I hope you can see it on the screen. So I think it is fair to say that the European gas market is facing a moment of unprecedented turbulence. When we are looking at gas prices in Europe, they averaged at over $30 per MMBTU since the beginning of the European heating season. This is 5 times the average of the past 5 years. And these record high gas prices are having a multitude of negative spillover effects. They contribute to higher coal burn in the power sector and as such increasing carbon emissions. They are driving up electricity prices to all-time highs. They are contributing to rapidly rising household bills, raging inflation, and also production curtailments in the gas and energy-intensive industries of Europe. And while Europe is really at the epicenter of the current gas crisis, the strong competition for LNG is driving up gas prices also in other parts of the world, including in Asia, in the Asia-Pacific region, and is also having negative impacts on the price-sensitive markets of the emerging Asia. But I think what is really important to note is that the current high gas and energy price environment is not caused by clean energy policies. It is rather due to a combination of short-term supply and demand factors. First, global gas demand increased more strongly than expected. Second, supply was weaker due to a number of unplanned outages. And third, Russian pipeline flows to Europe dropped significantly, something Mr. Karpinski will discuss in great detail in the second part of the presentation. So this is just a global overview of how gas demand evolved in 2021. According to our very first estimates, global gas demand increased by 4.6% or 180 BCM in absolute terms, the third largest annual increase in the history of gas. This is a stronger increase than what we had previously expected, and it has been driven on one hand by the strong economic recovery, with global GDP expansion as estimated at 6%, but also it has been driven by a number of unforeseen weather-related factors. We had a cold and long heating season in the Northern Hemisphere, including in Eurasia and Russia. And then we had a number of droughts, including in Brazil, California, but also in China and Southern Europe, which also contributed to higher gas burn in the power sector. And as we can see, most of the growth has been really concentrated in the first half of the year, and then moderated down in the third and the fourth quarter, partly because of the record high gas prices made on gas demand in the industry and in the power sector. So if we want to have a closer look on the European picture, this slide shows the evolution of estimated daily gas demand in Europe in 2020 and in 2021. According to our first estimates, European gas consumption increased by over 5.5% or 30 BCM in 2021. And again, most of the growth has been concentrated in the first half of the year. In Q1, we had several winter cold spells, but really the strong growth have been articulated in the second quarter of the year when we had post-lockdown recovery, but also a prolonged heating season lasting into April and even in May in certain European markets. In the third quarter of the year, gas demand in Europe dropped by an estimated 5% due to gas to coal switching in the power sector, but also industrial production curtailments starting at the beginning of September due to the rapidly rising gas prices. I think what is also interesting to note here is that in the last quarter of the year, despite the record high gas prices, demand remained rather resilient. And this demonstrates quite well the low price elasticity of natural gas demand. We had colder temperatures, which were supporting distribution network related demand. But also in the power sector, we have seen that gas demand increased by around 5%, mainly because the low hydro output in the Southern European markets, including in Iberia, Italy, and Turkey. And as such, most of the demand response to these very high gas prices came from the industrial sectors, where we estimate that demand dropped by around 5%. So the second point I would like to draw your attention on is that gas supply was also weaker in 2021 than what we would expected. And this is due to several facts, but one is that the unplanned outages have been higher than in previous years. In the case of LNG, planned and unplanned outages were about 27% higher compared to the 2015-2020 period. And this was partly driven by plant failures, unexpected repair works, but also feed gas supply issues, primarily in Nigeria and Trinidad and Tobago. In addition, the summer maintenance in the UK and on the Norwegian continental shelf was more heavy than usual due to the delayed maintenance from 2020. Altogether, we estimate that over 50 BCM of gas and LNG production capacity has been impacted by planned maintenance and unplanned outages in 2021, which is substantially higher than in previous years. And this resulted in a weaker than expected supply at a time when demand recovered quite strongly, leading to tight market conditions. And up in that, we have seen that pipeline supply from Russia has been also showing a different pattern than in previous years. And now I would like to invite my colleague, Miloš Karpinski, to elaborate further on Russian pipeline deliveries into Europe.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you now, and thank you. As this was shown by Gazprom now, the current market context cannot be understood without the role played by Russia in European gas supply. As we see on the picture, due to declining domestic production, the import dependency of the EU and the UK increased significantly since 2009. It was then just over 60% and rose to over 80% last year. Consequently, and despite the diversification efforts of certain countries, the share of Russian gas in European gas consumption has increased over the last decade from 25% in 2009 over 37% in 2019. This in turn provides Gazprom with significant market powers and influence. Our preliminary data shows that Russia's share dropped in 2021 to 32%, although this is due to Gazprom's particular market behavior on that very year. If we see now, despite, as was said before by Mr. Milov, despite the record high gas prices in Europe, Gazprom drastically reduced its gas supply deliveries to Europe since the beginning of the heating season, contributing to the current high gas price levels and the artificial tightness, as we call it, we have witnessed for some time now. We estimate that gas supplies dropped by close to 25% year-on-year in fourth quarter of 2021, mainly due to lower transit flows via Belarus and Ukraine. Pipeline supplies have fallen even more significantly since the end of December. The Yamal gas pipeline stopped flowing natural gas to Germany as of 20th December and has been operating in a reverse mode ever since, while flows from Ukraine to Slovakia also halved in January compared to December last year. Lower Russian gas supplies have been compensated by high Norwegian and Azeri deliveries, both running closely full capacities, while Algeria also increased its supplies on commercially available routes, namely the Medgas and Transmed pipelines, by over 10% in fourth quarter of 2021. And as we can see on the chart, it was really the LNG that made up for the most of the shortfall in Russian gas pipeline supplies. LNG inflow to Europe increased by over 40% in fourth quarter of 2021, largely supported by flexible LNG flows from the US and Qatar, but also Egypt. In January 2022, LNG inflows more than doubled to reach an all-time record of 16 BCM, with almost half of the volumes delivered by the US. So this highlights the importance of the growing flexibility of LNG and its contribution to gas supply security. And the next slide is Gazprom has also a strong influence, as also mentioned before by Mr. Milov. Gazprom has a strong influence on Europe's gas storage levels. The company owns or controls approximately 10% of Europe's underground gas storage capacities. If we look at this chart, we see that storage levels at the beginning of April 2021, the official start of the injection season in Europe, were just at the average level. As noted previously, the heating season extended into April and May in some regions, which naturally delayed the start of injections. But what is also clear from this chart is that net injections remained unlimited during the summer season. Consequently, storage levels in Europe stood at 17% below the five-year average on 1st October last year, and were just 78% full. Notably, storage owned or partially owned by Gazprom were filled to just 25% of their working storage capacity. In fact, Gazprom alone contributed to half of Europe's storage deficit, providing further pressure on the market. Europe's gas storage levels fell recently to below 33% of their working capacities. And if we assume average withdrawals for the rest of the heating season, storage levels could fall to just 25% capacities by early March, leaving Europe vulnerable to late cold spells or major supply disruptions further into the early spring this year. In this context, it is not surprising that certain European countries are considering to introduce more stringent storage regulations, including storage obligations and minimum fill levels of underground gas storages. As noted by the European Commission, risk related to storages owned by non-EU members can be so much significant. As this chart shows, this drop is very significant. As Mr. Milov pointed out before, this actually is something what we can have a problem in the weeks to come. That depends on the weather, but also it depends on the future supplies and possible disruptions if those materialize. Thank you very much, and we'll leave at your disposal for the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Really, that is a situation on the market, which was very well described by experts from the International Energy Agency and also by Vladimir Milov, what Gazprom is doing. Now I have the pleasure and honor to give the floor to Peter Liese, my colleague from European Parliament, member of European Parliament, and EPP coordinator in ENVI committee, and also now rapporteur on one of the files, very important files, on the whole package of Fit for 55, which is part of Green Deal. And we had very, very important discussions with Peter Liese, both in the group and different other occasions. So Peter, please, floor is yours.
Yeah, sorry, I have been interrupted, so I better switch out my mobile now to be with you only. Thank you very much, Andrius. I'm very happy to be invited to this conference. As has been said, I'm the coordinator in ENVI. And for me, of course, the idea to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels was first and foremost linked to the environment and the climate. We witnessed flooding in summer in Central Europe. We have seen the heat waves in Southern Europe and the forest fires again and again. And we know that much more devastating problems will occur if we don't stop climate change. And that has also a direct link to Russia, because you know a lot of methane is stored in the permafrost in the Siberia. And if this methane is released because the average temperature will rise, then we will trigger climate change, and maybe our children and grandchildren cannot stop it at all. We speak about so-called tipping points. So that's, as an environmental politician, of course, my main motivation. But I always also expressed my concern that we need to reduce our dependency on fossil fuel imports, because we get oil and gas from quite problematic countries. The Arab countries are problematic in the way that human rights are not protected there, most of them. And of course, in Russia, you know, I fundamentally disagree with Gerhard Schröder, our former chancellor, who really outrageous. Again, and when he was chancellor, he already said Putin is a Democrat without doubt, and that's of course a lie. And now he's rather doing the job of Russia and criticizing Ukraine. So that's unacceptable for me. And I always said, already when I argued against Nord Stream 1, you know, we are united against Nord Stream 2 now, but I was already against Nord Stream 1, because I said the money that we invest should not go to the pockets of Putin and the oligarchs. It should go to the pockets of European industry, which create innovative solutions for renewable energy and energy efficiency, and for the installers that bring it to the ground. And now we have this unprecedented crisis of energy prices connected with an unprecedented political crisis. And many blame EU environmental politics for the problem. I have looked at the figures, and Andrius, maybe you or your office can show the first chart. We see the effect on the electricity price in Europe due to the EU ETS. That is the green part. So there's a slight increase, and we need to look at this. But the big part, the gray part, is the gas price. So the gas price triggers the electricity price, and the gas price for those who need gas is even increasing more. There are 800% increase, but the electricity price is also rising due to the gas price, because we depend a lot on gas in our electricity supply, and when it's rare and expensive, that will have an immediate effect on the price of electricity. And I'm quite sure, after talking with Andrius and many other experts, that in fact Russia is afraid of the Green Deal. If we reduce our dependency from oil and gas, Russia will lose money. They cannot continue their existing business model. And we have heard some evidence here that they are deliberately manipulating the market. And I'm quite convinced that this is the case. One other information that I would like to share is that Russia, of course, brings gas to China, but we heard that this amounts and resources of gas are not directly linked. So it's other type of gas that they bring to China than they don't bring to Europe. And the price for China is quite moderate compared to the European price. So they give the gas for a lower price to China than they give it to Europe. So there is a lot of politics there's a lot of manipulation in. It's not a normal market, and that's why we should react. Unfortunately, we need to react immediately to reduce the burden of citizens. That's why I'm in favor of support, reducing taxes and fees on energy, especially on electricity, because high prices of electricity are a burden for our citizens, for families, especially low-income families, for our business, especially SMEs. And that's why we need to help, but also especially the electricity bill needs to be reduced, because the electricity is what will bring the transition. If people go from a gas boiler in their house to a heat pump, they use electricity. And if the electricity bill is too high because we have too many taxes and fees, they will not do it. So let's reduce electricity price. The same is with cars. We are dependent from oil. And if we go for electric vehicles, people shouldn't be bothered by too high electricity prices. So a targeted reduction of electricity compared to a reduction of gas and oil prices will not only help the families and the business, but it will also enable the transition. And I think that's what we do. Of course, we have to react also on the ETS market. We have a price increase in the ETS market. That is the second chart, which I would like to share with you. Yeah, this is the ETS price. It has also gone up significantly. That's why, as a rapporteur, I announced to have an amendment. And the price was even higher than 95. It was at 97. Now it's down to 89, only the announcement of an amendment. So we are doing our bit. Europe is doing its bit. I also talked to the Commission here that this, what we can do inside Europe will be controlled. And also the high ETS price is triggered by the scarcity of gas, because when you can't buy gas because it's not available on the market or it's just too expensive, people go back to coal and they have to pay more for the CO2 emissions, and that triggers the ETS price. So I'm sure that part of this curve is due to policy. We wanted a higher carbon price, but the last part from 60 to 97 is again Russia, because if gas is expensive and not available, people go to coal, and that increases the ETS price. So what we need is, of course, regulation of the ETS price, and I made some amendments which already brought the price down, even though they are not yet adopted, but the markets react. They know that we are determined, and I think that's the same with Russia. If we are determined, if we say we will do the Green Deal, and either you change your business model and you work with us on hydrogen, for example. In Russia, there's plenty of place for solar panels, for other types of renewable energies, and they can work with us, but they need to change their business model. And I'm optimistic that there are enough wise people in Russia that want to survive also in a climate neutral world and help us with hydrogen and cooperate and not use old technologies that destroy the planet to destroy the partnership and to put pressure on countries like the Ukraine. So my message is go tell it from the mountains, the Green Deal is a solution and not the cause of the problem.
Thanks a lot, Peter. Yeah, for very clear message, which I agree absolutely. And now we're moving to Dr. Frank Umbach from University of Bonn, Head of Research, European Cluster for Climate, Energy and Resource Security, and also Center for Advanced Security, Strategic and Integration Studies. So really we have an expert who can speak about the whole situation of European energy security and German energy security, which really are also quite clear problems which we need to see.
Yes,
please go on, Frank.
Yeah, Mr. Kubilius, many thanks again for inviting me and collaborating with you. So we know each other for almost, I think, 15 years. I think we have heard excellent presentations by also my old friend Vladimir Milov and the IEA. So I have written myself and published recently on Russia's manipulation of the gas markets. I don't want to add too much to this debate. But rather maybe add some issues on the political front, which I think we need urgently address. Maybe just one remark to the European gas crisis. Also, from my point of view, the origin of the European gas crisis had nothing to do with Russia. It has rather to do with the global gas supply crisis, demand and supply, as we have heard it. But Russia and Putin have clearly manipulated the crisis and deepened the problems on the European gas supply side, and also being responsible for an even higher explosion of the gas prices. I would also add I think there are several lessons also to learn in this context, actually, how Russia acted in the Moldova gas crisis. Yeah, and you could clearly see how Russia had blackmailed the Moldovan government, and was also successful at the end. Although the interpretation of the new contract is a little bit different on the Moldovan government side, but normally when you read the text, I think the implementation of the third energy package, as a member of the energy community, that appears to be blocked at least until 2027. So the conditional approaches here, policies by Russia in blackmailing the Moldovan government, should also teach us in a certain way, and also explains how Russia reacted during the European gas crisis. More important, secondly, I would go back, and Mr. Kubilius knows that very well, back to the year or to the year of the second Russian-Ukrainian gas conflict, 2009-2010, when we implemented the third energy package, a new gas directive. We clearly defined the strategic objective of reducing the dependence on Russia. And we have heard already how Russia's share in respect to the European demand has increased from 25 to 32%. I give you another figure, which is also maybe even more revealing. Also the EU's or the Russia's share in regard to the EU imports have risen also during the last years, even after the Crimea annexation in 2014, to a level of 44% in 2020, when you combine not just the pipeline supplies, but also to combine it with Russia's increasing LNG supplies to Europe. And in the fourth quarter of 2021, the share of this combined pipeline and LNG supplies from Russia to the EU has even increased to 53%, according to the official EU figures. So that means when you go back to the gas directive 2010 and the discussions we had, also later defined in the EU's energy strategy, security strategy, we have clearly not achieved the strategic objective we defined 10 years ago by reducing the share of Gazprom and reducing the share of Russia. And I would add to this point, when you're looking to the present certification of the Nord Stream pipeline, where we wait decisions on the Bundesnetzagentur in Germany, as well as by the European Commission. So the Russian understanding or solution from its own perception that it has to accept the third-party access, which means it can only use 50% of the Nord Stream oil pipelines. The Russian idea is to provide the other 50% to Rosneft, another state-owned company. So my question also to the European Commission is this something acceptable in the light what we have defined in strategic objectives at a time after 2010, which was not just related to Gazprom? We wanted to reduce the overall dependence on Russia. And here again, Germany comes into the broader picture because the situation in Germany is even worse. The situation in Germany is that the Russian share of Germany's gas imports have actually risen from approximately 42% in the year 2010 actually to 55% today. And that means even before the Nord Stream 2 pipeline may begin its operation, with some forecast that Germany or that Russia's share of German gas imports can even rising to 60%. So the situation is here worse. I can explain that why it's partly been happening, etc. But I wanted just to draw your attention to the certification of the Nord Stream pipeline and the Russian idea providing here Rosneft access to the other 50% of the supplies, which would make the situation overall even much more worse. And we have to make up our minds whether that's really acceptable, particularly in the light of the present experiences with the European gas supplies and Russia's manipulation of supplies to Europe. Third point, the Green Deal of the EU. I very much agree what Mr. Liese and Mr. Kubillo had also said at the very beginning. From a Russian point of view, of course, that's a kind of EU warfare against Russia. When you're looking to Russia's energy security strategy till 2035, which clearly envisages a further rise of oil, gas, as well as of coal production and exports, particularly from the Arctic field, where 90% of the oil and gas is already taking place. I could also add a lot of things in terms of Russia's new climate policies. There is a new interest and interesting also some changes in Russia's approaches to the official climate policies prior also to the Glasgow summit, but it also has its strict limits by all understanding. And the strict limits are clearly being defined that by all compromises with the EU or with the Glasgow process, the further increase of oil and gas production in the Arctic should definitely not blocked and hindered by any new climate policies. So that opens a huge front of new conflict also with the EU, particularly if you look to Russia's official climate policies, such as the CO2 absorption targets by using Russian forests. Actually, that is completely unrealistic, as also Russian experts have highlighted that in the domestic debates. And I should add that the domestic wildfires, just giving you one fact for that, just the domestic wildfires during the last years in Russia have destroyed forest areas of the size of Belgium every year. So the absorption capacities of Russian forest actually are decreasing and not increasing. And the official policies here and the figures the Russia provided also at the Glasgow summit are more what we normally can call greenwashing. Coming back to one point to the EU policies, where I see also more action needs to be done. As a consultant of NATO on energy security last December at the annual energy security roundtable, also with the European Commission, I have drawn the attention to the fact that the gas storage sites are an area which are hardly regulated at all, particularly not by the EU. Yeah, this is one of the sectors where unbundling has not really taken place at all. In Germany, a quarter of all the gas storage capacity actually is being controlled by Gazprom, something which I have never understood. Yeah, the gas storage site, like oil storage site, should be seen as the most important instrument, particularly during gas supply crisis. And the situation had been over the last months that even market participants could also withdraw gas from the storage site, not because of the supply crisis, which could even worse when we're looking ahead in an escalating Ukraine conflict. And I just published also a paper, what will happen when 50% of the Russian gas supplies would be cut, or the entirely, to which extent the EU is able to deal with that. Yeah, but in this respect, gas had been withdrawn from the gas storage sites for reasons which have more to do with stabilizing the gas prices. That, of course, could be allowed during times when we would not face a major supply crisis, like in the context of the Ukraine conflict. This has been done like in the US with the oil storage site, where the government has always been extremely careful for releasing oil supplies from the storage sites for stabilizing crisis or short-term supply impacts by an imbalance of supply and demand, because they are the last resort. This is something where we need to look very closely. I think the German Economic Ministry will now change the regulation in a way that all owners of the gas storage sites will be forced to fill up the gas storage site by the early autumn in the future. That's a very important step, but it can't be the only one. We need to ask ourselves, and I see here some contradictories also in the German policies at all, can we allow a state-owned company of an aggressive, repressive, authoritarian country such as Russia being an owner of the most important and the last resort instrument of gas supply security, which is, in my understanding, completely unacceptable. And I should add, we have changed, for example, these kind of ownership possibilities in regard to China as another authoritarian state, where we reduce the possibilities of becoming owner of critical infrastructures in Germany and the EU. But we allow that at the same time, actually, for Gazprom on the European or German gas storage side. That's something I really never understand. So this is something where we have really to look here in regulations and also introducing some kind of unbundling in the gas storage side sector. That should be also one of the most important lessons. Last point, which refers to the Green Deal and the instruments in reducing our gas import dependencies. Of course, that's the right way, but we need to be a little bit careful of not repeating the same mistake in regard to the forthcoming hydrogen import dependency. And what I see here is another alarming trend. We have and strengthen collaboration between the European and also German gas companies with Gazprom on common hydrogen projects. I'm not totally against that possibility, and we should also could also theoretically use that politically and condition in a certain way. Yeah, but we have now a situation where the industry is going ahead by collaborating with Gazprom and Russian companies at a time when we have, politically speaking, maybe I missed that here something in the European Parliament, but when you look to the German debates, neither in the Parliament nor in the public, there's any political debate on the question to which extent we want to become again dependent on Russia or other suppliers in the same way as we have become dependent today on the gas imports. And we need urgently a political debate of not repeating the same mistake. And now we do have the chance and the time to do it before we implementing the hydrogen projects with foreign partners. And we need here a deliberate strategy for diversifying imports. And the import demand is very, very huge, both in the case as well as in the case of Germany, as well as in the EU. And therefore, we need to make up our minds in defining strategy and strategic objectives, in reducing and diversifying the hydrogen imports as much as possible, and not repeating the same mistake in a way that we have nothing learned from the over-dependence on gas supplies coming from Russia. And then maybe stop here.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Umbach. Really, it's a very strong and very clear message, which we need to take really into account in our discussions back in European Parliament and other institutions, since really threats which we need to diminish, are very clear from that point of view. And now we're turning to Ukraine. Issues, not on military threats, but on energy threats again, which are very clear. On one side, Nord Stream 2, from another side, in general, cuts in deliveries of gas, which we can foresee. So I, with my collaborator, Katya Musienko, we just published one paper on that, you can see links in the chat. But now I'm very happy to give the floor to Alexander Sherba, Chief Advisor to the CEO of Naftogaz of Ukraine. Please, Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Kubilius. Thank you, colleagues, for your interest, for invitation. Greetings from Kiev, which is still free, still democratic. There haven't been too many good news, unfortunately, from Ukraine in the last couple of weeks. Right now, there is a cautious reason for optimism. There has been announced the withdrawal of Russian troops from our border. Although right now I received a notification from New York Times that NATO officially declared that it doesn't see any signs of withdrawal. But anyways, we are used here to live one day at a time. The second good news in Ukraine, it's warm, and it seems like it's gonna be warm in the upcoming weeks, hopefully months, which means that it will be yet another winter where Russia's dream of Ukraine freezing to death would just be thwarted and sizzle away, so to say. We understand that that Europe is at a crossroads. Europe has to, and this situation with Ukraine, it shows a couple of very important things. One of them is, unfortunately, today's Russia is not a friend of Europe. And if you pursue projects like Nord Stream 2, you give not only Europe's past, but also partly Europe's future in the energy field to someone who isn't a friend of Europe, which means, and it's not only about Nord Stream 2, it's also about the gas storage facilities which Mr. Umbach mentioned, which are also owned by Russia. So, which also means that if Nord Stream 2 is there, if Nord Stream 1 and 2 become the artery, the main artery supplying Europe with gas, then it would mean that, for instance, the Green Deal is endangered because it gives Russia the opportunity to play with the energy price high and low and make the Green Deal and the renewables in many ways unsustainable or less sustainable than they could be. So I won't be holding a long speech in view of what is happening around Ukraine and in Europe. We in Ukraine have a couple of very strong suggestions for Europe. First, if it's possible, if it's still possible, please help us stop certification of Nord Stream 2, because the second step, the step afterwards, we strongly suspect would be shutting down Ukraine's gas transportation system, eliminating Ukraine as an energy player. And this is bad not only for Ukraine, but for Europe, because without this very flexible, huge Ukrainian gas transportation system, Europe would be even more depending on someone who is not Europe's friend. Two, please, if you cannot stop Nord Stream 2, then at least negotiate with Russians as far as possible and strongly as possible that they don't have an option of cutting off Ukrainian gas transportation system. And three, we have suggested it a couple of times with you, Mr. Kubilius, including that it would make sense probably to utilize Ukraine's huge gas the gas storage facilities in the Western Ukraine more than it is the case now. So if there is a possibility, and there should be a possibility, to influence those companies who buy Russian gas to have a certain amount in the Ukrainian underground storage facilities, it would be more guaranteed. It would be the cushion, the energy cushion for Europe in general. Ukrainian gas transportation system is needed not only in Ukraine but in Europe. So please be mindful of that. Thank you. We can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot. Yeah. So thanks a lot for your clear message, Mr. Sherba. You know, exactly that is what we wrote in the paper, and we are trying, you know, now to go around and to speak, you know, in institutions that really what Europe, what EU needs to do, looking into longer term future and forecasting that, you know, pressure from Kremlin can stay for a longer period of time on Ukraine. So besides, you know, support in defense capacities, besides, you know, integration towards single market as possibility to improve, you know, Ukrainian economy. You know, one thing which EU needs to do really is to take care about security of supply to Ukraine, which, as we wrote in a paper, at least what we understand, what you can do really is, first of all, to invest not a big amount of money, but to invest into those modernization of technologies or I don't know how to call those, you know, equipments which are needed on Slovakia-Ukrainian border and Polish-Ukrainian border in order to allow physical flow of gas from the west to Ukraine, which would allow also then to use, you know, in real terms, to use storage capacities which we have in Ukraine, and really to resolve at least some of the problems which Mr. Umbach was speaking about, you know, which is really difficult to understand why Europe is sometimes behaving in such a really not very prudent way when, you know, Gazprom is allowed to have also storage capacities in Germany. So now really we are we finished our presentation. Thanks a lot. Really very interesting, very important, and a lot of thoughts. You know, I can, you know, myself put a lot of questions, but we're looking into the audience, which is, we have possibility also to put some questions. At least I saw one question for time being. Maybe Mr. Obach can you know, can comment on that. This is from Jean-Paul Schittekeif, I don't know if that's the name. On that the best way, what can be, you know, that this is a European problem. Then the best way how to, what can be an alternative to Russian gas is Iranian gas, and that we are again, you know, in some kind of geopolitical trouble. So I don't know if you can make some comment on that, but yeah, please unmute yourself.
Well, I'm certainly in supporter of a value-based European foreign security and energy policy, but of course we cannot just work together with the ever smaller number of democracies around the world. Yeah, but we do have, of course, the possibility of diversifying our imports as much as possible. When you take the oil sector in the 1970s, 80s, there was an defined but not contracted goal somehow that we should never become dependent to more than 30% of just just one country. Yeah, so I'm not totally against Russian pipeline gas, but definitely not to the extent of Russian supplies going up to 50, almost 50%, or in the German way even more. Yeah, so this can be, of course, regulated. Yeah, the argumentation had always been you can rely that on the industry. We looking just to the import of who offers the cheapest gas. I myself have written in 2017 and was really asking the question how it can be that Russian gas from Bovanenkovo, 4,200 kilometers far from Germany, can be so cheap. Yeah, because the production costs in the Arctic field of Bovanenkovo are several times high in comparison with the old fields. Then Russia had to build 4,000 kilometers of gas pipelines to St. Peter, 3,000 kilometers of new gas pipelines to St. Petersburg for Nord Stream 1 and now Nord Stream 2. When you compare that with US energy companies, private ones, yeah, they have to price in their total investments, the production cost, not just of the fields, but also of the connecting pipelines from their fields in Texas to the coast of the Gulf, of the Gulf Coast. These prices are priced in. On the Russian side, these are not priced in. They are subsidized, actually. And that's the reason why Russia can offer so cheap prices from fields like in the Arctic, where the temperatures in average is minus 50%, where you need much more energy just to produce the gas in comparison with the old fields. And then transporting 3,000 kilometers via new pipelines. And this highlights how less commerciality plays here a role in Russian exports. If Russia would have, in the same way, to price in all the investment costs of the infrastructure and production costs as private US companies would do it, Russian gas would certainly not be able so cheap, and would be probably not even be able to be competitive enough towards LNG imports. The same way is with the new circumvention pipeline Turk Stream. yeah, which is not just running to the Black Sea. You need to ask, where is the gas coming for the Turk Stream pipeline, which is then being connected throughout southeastern Europe to Austria. Yeah, this gas is actually also coming from the Arctic fields in the future, partly at the moment still at some of the old fields, but the distance is 5 or 6,000 kilometers long. Take a look on the map. And independent Russian experts like Vladimir, but also Kotichin and others have already calculated the transport costs are 4 times as high as the traditional route for the supplying of gas through Ukraine to Hungary. Now Hungary is getting a gas price, which is an artificial one. Yeah, it's coming through 5,000–6,000 kilometers through Russia, which can never be commercially viable in a normal way if it's not being subsidized in a way. Yeah, and you may, the counter argument has always been, I don't care as a European if Russia is subsidizing that, but the effect is that Russia is manipulating here the gas market and the competition on the market, because it's not priced in all the investment production costs in the same way as private ones, such as US LNG providers. And so it's manipulating the competitiveness on the European market for geopolitical reasons. This is, again, also not a question in which the EU deals with. And I and others have already referred some years ago on that kind of fact. There's still no debate about it. So we have changed this issue of competitiveness for the import of Chinese solar panels, which are subsidized. In this respect, we are changing that and putting a tax on the border to make European production more competitive. But we don't do it in the same way, for example, for the Russian gas.
Yeah, thanks a lot again. Thanks a lot, Mr. Umbach, for a very clear message. Now I see that time is running. We have several questions. I will read them. But first of all, even from discussion among the panelists, I see that Vladimir can maybe, as a final, statement, make some remarks on what's so really Russian, developments. I mean, policy on Green Deal. How do you see, what's authorities of today are doing, and in general, how you see the whole developments in energy sector, looking into the future. Then we have a question. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking to Peter, on. Since you are, European German politician, here are questions about German policy, dependencies and so on in general, but also somebody, Michael Anderson, asked about certification of Nord Stream 2, very, very practical question, very, very, very clear question on how things can go on with that. And I see also the question on maybe our experts from International Energy Agency can also react to what was said by all the speakers. But also the question is, which role could nuclear power play in EU energy mix? What's the agency opinion about that question, which we also are. With the taxonomy now, we are discussing quite heavily in the parliament. And one more question came from Karolina Shelmokaite, exactly to Mr. Umbach. In the best case scenario, when can we reach the stage where the EU no longer uses Russian gas? Well, it's quite a tough question, but I remember in one of our first seminars last June or July, we spoke about European Council on Foreign Relations paper on geopolitical consequences of Green Deal. And then I remember that they put the number from Commission forecast that after 2035, gas imports to Europe will be cut by in between of 60 and 70%. So which will mean that it will also diminish Russian gas import. So now I will turn first of all maybe to Vladimir, then Peters and agency experts, and then again, you know, Alexander, if you will see what else you can tell, and then the last one will be Frank Kumbach. Okay? Yeah. So please, Vladimir.
Thank you very much for very interesting and thoughtful discussion. Great experts involved, and I was also pleased to hear the assessments by the International Energy Agency experts, which actually confirmed that yes, Russia was a significant contributor to European gas price crisis by withholding the volumes, unfortunately. Now, on the Green Deal, Andrius, we talked about this before. Putin and his government are absolutely terrified on the perspective of European green transition. And first, it's very clear that Putin himself and his government officials and Gazprom and Russian propaganda have very quickly picked up on this European gas market troubles, blaming it essentially on a green transition policy and also on the EU market liberalization, because there one of the big ideas is return to this old style, old-fashioned long-term gas supply contracts with a handful of appointed consumers in Europe, protected territories, and bringing down all the efforts to increase competition on the European market that was so successful in the past couple of decades. Many of us remember what the European gas market was 20 years ago. It was essentially broken down between exclusive zones of interest of national monopolies, mini Gazproms, if you will. Things have greatly improved since then, and Gazprom and Putin are not happy about it. But also, obviously, the Green Deal was also a focus of blame. As we have discussed today, that's a totally false narrative. And I'm happy that colleagues have provided a lot of data actually proving that the greatest contribution to energy price crisis in Europe last fall was undersupply by Russia, and the gas costs are so much bigger than carbon costs and so on. And so that was initially the crisis. I agree that it emerged as a natural market occurrence. But Russia is a dominant supplier for Europe, unfortunately did not behave as a responsible player, and also added fuel to the fire by doubling down on gas deficit in Europe, when I just described how. Yes, I believe that they will be not only using this current energy crisis to undermine the Green Deal and to advocate to return to old-fashioned dinosaur forms of life like long-term vested contracts. But they will continue. If they are not punished with the European antitrust authorities for what has been a direct violation of an EU antitrust law, withholding volumes of supply to the prejudice of the consumer is a direct violation of EU law. If they're not punished, not fined for that, they will come back around again. Doing the same thing. We already saw how that was unfolding in the past few months. And obviously they will use this to attack European implementation of the Green Deal, which we already saw in propaganda. Practical sabotage measures are to follow. Another important thing which Frank Kumbach have mentioned, that's also very important. At the same time, they're trying to tie all the same big European energy companies into a new game, into tying them into joint projects on hydrogen, ammonia, whatever supplies related to European green transition, so that dependence on Gazprom's gas supply is being converted in dependence on big state Russian players in green energy field. I think Europe should take a necessary caution about that and make sure that the green transition, the Green Deal, is being implemented, bearing in mind that we do not need new monopolies replacing the old ones. We also need a competitive market. Europe had achieved a lot with liberalizing the market and introducing competition, And it's not good if Gazprom's market domination in natural gas will be replaced with Gazprom's domination in hydrogen. So there's a lot to watch here. I completely agree with Frank Umbach. But then again, important call. We need not to loosen our pressure on the EU authorities to actually launch this antitrust case against Gazprom. Because if there will be no action in retaliation to withholding the volumes of gas from Europe last year, they will be repeating this behavior further, and more crises will emerge in the coming months and years. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Vladimir. Clear message. Yeah, Peter, please go on. And yeah, we shall continue a few minutes after 2 o'clock, as we promised, to stop. But nevertheless, it's very interesting. Please, Peter, go on.
Yeah, thank you, Andrius, and thank you to all the speakers. Just one clarification on the last point, which was also mentioned by Mr. Umbach. When I said we can cooperate with Russia on hydrogen, first of all, I think it's key to diversify. So we shouldn't depend on hydrogen from Russia like we do on gas and oil. So there should be different sources, but it can anyhow be an income for Russia. And I think it can also trigger the transition. So this old business model based on oligarchs and oil and gas must change. And it is more likely to change if there are other ways and means to earn money, and they need to go for innovation like the Arab states, for example, do. That is, for me, important to clarify. Then on nuclear, it's a difficult question. We have strong divisions also inside the parliament in all political groups. I value the decision of some member states to continue with nuclear, and maybe the German phase out of nuclear would not have been decided for this year if we would know in what a mess we are in now. So that is, after some years, you are always more intelligent, but it's not possible easily to reverse, because even the companies that have these nuclear power plants, they say we cannot just stop the process. We don't have supply of uranium. We don't have the people, so they all have other jobs now. And we cannot just say we keep it. And for the future, I don't think nuclear is a solution, because it's more expensive than a combination of renewables, energy efficiency, and hydrogen in different and other different storing technologies. So to invest in the nuclear for the future is not convincing. And on top of that, we have this problem of nuclear waste. We have the problem of risk. New reports that cancer rate is increasing close to Fukushima. So as a doctor, I would also be hesitant to support nuclear, but value the decision. It's a question of subsidiarity. The taxonomy is a challenge, because even if you accept nuclear under certain criteria, the criteria that the taxonomy sets is even more challenging. So I'm together with our coordinator on economy, who we are both responsible. We are rather against this delegated act, but that has to be discussed at another place. On the question of certification of Nord Stream, I don't know if there is an opportunity. I'm happy that finally the German Chancellor said they will stop Nord Stream 2 if Russia has a military intervention in the Ukraine. It took too much time. There was a problem. As I said, I was always against Nord Stream, already Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And in my party in Germany, CDU, we have different positions that I have to admit. But the main driver of Nord Stream was always Social Democratic Party. And the EPP is very clear. Andreas, we have a strong majority, including our chair, Manfred Weber. We are against Nord Stream. And this is, I think, a very clear position here at European level. And I'm the European parliamentarian, so I know that some colleagues at national level have different position, but I'm the EPP coordinator, and that's why I say we need to get rid of this dependency, and Nord Stream 2 is the wrong signal and the wrong operation in these difficult times. Thank you.
Again,
now it works. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I always forget. So I turn to International Energy Agency. I don't know if you both will speak or one of you, but please go on. Whoever was that question on nuclear, but in general you can make your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Kubilius, and again thank you for having us with you today. Very briefly on the issue of nuclear and European Green Deal. Because it has been, of course, also assessed by the IEA. And as you may know, IEA is an author of first ever global net zero scenario. So actually what has to be done to achieve net zero by 2050. It was published the last year, and actually this year is also continued with some country focused analysis. And actually we say clearly in this net zero pathway that nuclear can be a viable option in countries which accept that, and in societies which also have nothing engaged. So actually it can, because as a clean source of energy, it can add to the decarbonization and the net zero target. For the European Green Deal, as many of speakers have said before, indeed, also that's the voice of, as you know, Mr. Kubilius, of Mr. Fatih Birol, our executive director. You had a call with Mr. Birol last week. I had the pleasure to be part of this call, and Mr. Birol says clearly we cannot actually blame. It's a false allegation to blame clean transitions for high prices. It's actually the other way around. We can blame ourselves for delayed transitions, and that's why actually what led to higher prices. So no way actually we can agree on having any responsibility taken by clean transitions with regards to high prices, and this is what we call tightness on the European energy markets. So clearly and shortly on this, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here with you today.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Now I turn then to Alexander Sherba. Your comments, final comments.
I'm afraid I don't have much to add, and I have to be running. Just thank you all for understanding, for supporting Ukraine, for understanding our cause, and please be mindful of Nord Stream 2. It's a threat to all of us.
Okay, good. And Frank Umbach, yeah, please go on.
Maybe two points. Firstly, coming back to the European gas supply security strategy, when we were building rightly all the interconnectors between the EU member states, the argumentation until very recently, also of many of my colleagues, also particularly also in Germany, was it doesn't matter any longer where the gas is coming from, because you can the gas then distribute it between all the EU member states. So you don't have to worry about over the dependence on Russia. Yeah, so that was the argumentation. That argumentation, however, had overlooked an important precondition. And the precondition is that this assumption largely is dependent on whether we still have a buyer's market or not. When a buyer's market is available, as we had until 2020, then you have enough alternative options for importing LNG from around the world, and it's only a question of money. But now we have no longer a buyer's market, we have a seller's market globally. And so the opportunities for buying LNG supplies at a short notice is very much restricted, as a number of recent studies over the last weeks have highlighted, including from myself. Yeah, when Russia cuts 50% of its overall supplies to Europe, at the present situation, we will really struggle to find alternatives in time, at a time when the gas storage flows are running empty by March or April. So we have a fundamental change on the global markets from a buyer's to a seller's market, which have direct implications on the energy supply alternatives in a major crisis, such as an escalating Ukraine conflict. And therefore, we have the share of Russian supplies to Europe and an over-dependence on Russia still matters. And that should not be overlooked. We were relying on too much optimistic scenarios and not anticipating a major change also on the global markets. Second point, very shortly, I very much agree what Mr. Liese was saying in respect to hydrogen. I'm also a supporter of hydrogen, of the Green Deal. But we should also be a little bit realistic, particularly when it comes to green hydrogen. According to all international forecasts, green hydrogen will only be competitive around 2030 with blue hydrogen. At the moment, it's extremely expensive, and we still have huge problems in a way because you need an extremist amount of clean or green energy resources to produce hydrogen. And I give you just one figure, one example, which highlights the dilemma. In Germany, we have an electricity production, which is approximately 500 or a little bit more, 500 terawatt hours. We have an analysis by the chemical industry just in Germany. If it would change to hydrogen as the only technical solution for the time being, yeah, then alone the chemical industry in Germany would have a green hydrogen demand of 600 terawatt hours. The total estimate in the longer term to move completely to hydrogen for the energy intensive industry and the rest of the German industry goes up to 1,500, 1,200, 1,500 terawatt hours. That's the double or 3 times of the total electricity production of Germany of today. So that explains the very high import demand, both by Germany as well as the EU in the future when it comes to hydrogen. And that was the reason why I was referring, we need a political debate now and not in few years, because the industry is going ahead with the Russians and with the old Russian gas companies, whether that's Gazprom, Rosneft, Novatek, or whatever it is. I'm not against hydrogen coming also from Russia, but I don't want to be in the same dependence dilemma as we are now with gas. And the industry is going ahead, and the policy is not really following and going and taking up that kind of political debate up to now. And then we come back to the same situation as with the Nord Stream 2 problem. Yeah, the industry went ahead with collaboration between European and German gas companies with Russian ones. And the political circles had no debate at all in 2012 on the questions whether we would like to become so much dependent on Russia and what kind of energy or gas supply security challenges and risks are involved in doing that. And that's the reason why I strongly appeal that we need a political debate on hydrogen imports demands. And I'm not against totally against imports from Russia, but we have to make up our minds politically in this respect.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Umbach, really important message. And here we are coming to the end of our seminar. Again, I would like to thank all the speakers. Really, it was very interesting, very important, and very informed, very powerful from informational point of view, seminar. a lot of food for thought and a lot of, a lot of things which we need to take care about here in the European Parliament. Things are really, demanding our political attention and political decisions. It so coincided that today, we had a really very important debate here in the European Parliament on Russian threats to Ukraine, military threats, what Mr. Sherba was speaking about, and all the leaders of EU institutions were present. Charles Michel, of course, Speaker of the Parliament, and also Ursula von der Leyen. And Ursula von der Leyen made very important statement exactly on energy security as things which became very clear for everybody. When we see all that, Kremlin geopolitical behavior threatening, not only Ukraine but all Europe, we need to understand what we are facing. And again, what we are sometimes repeating, with Vladimir in our seminars, that it's sad joke, but we can be maybe grateful to Mr. Putin, that he is really pushing us to become much more united and trying to resolve some problems which, without his aggressive behavior, perhaps we would not be, able to do it. And the message of Ursula von der Leyen was very simple. We cannot trust that Gazprom will stay in the future as a reliable, supply of gas. That is one thing which became very clear. And then second, that energy security really and especially in gas field is becoming a big challenge for Europe, and Green Deal is an answer to that challenge. So that was a message which we talked also here in our seminar. I would like to thank all of you. I think that those topics really will become very important in our discussions in the European Parliament. And I hope that we shall, have possibilities again to meet in one or another seminar, which we are ready to organize. Thanks a lot to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.